Thank you all for coming here on Sunday morning. It's so nice to see that tea resonates with all of you. When Karishma talked about rituals, for me, tea itself started because I don't cook very much. I got married. My husband is devoted to his coffee, and tea was entirely my thing to do. So I started finding ways to make my whole tea making and tea brewing more interesting for myself. I started looking for more tea. I found that if it said more leaf, I like the flavors a little more. If it said Assam, I kind of seem to like it a little more. And then, of course, I had a child, and he became even more a big fixture in my life. It seemed like the only legitimate way to get out of get a 10-minute break for myself. So in the last 10 years that I've been learning about tea, or tasting tea and making tea and meeting people who make tea, there's just so much happening with that. And but before we go into it, I hope you all enjoyed the tea and chai you had. For those of you who had the black tea without milk, that's from a small, that's a Lapsang Souchong from Sri Lanka. It's a Chinese style of tea. It's usually smoked over pine wood, but since it's a Sri Lanka, it's smoked over cinnamon wood. So you would have had some of that. And just an added bit of trivia, it's also a tea that Benedict Cumberbatch likes a lot. So, you're in good company. It's also a tea that Benedict Cumberbatch likes a lot. Dr. Strange likes it. Good to know, right? I thought so. I thought so. And the other tea, the chai, is from an estate called Halmari in the Moran district in Assam. It's the second flush single estate tea. The estate is 100 plus years old. It's one of the finest Assam tea producing estates. And this blend I got from a brand called Teacups Full. They're a Gurgaon based family brand. And what they've done is they have blended CTC with leaf. So CTC gives you the body and strength. The leaf brings in the flavor. So it's a personal favorite. So I thought I should share with all of you. So I hope you enjoy those teas. Why Assam? I was trying to think about what we could talk about, right? And I feel the one thing we probably need to know more of is our own history with tea, the Indian tea history. The Chinese have it for 5,000 years. Our recorded history is perhaps 200 years old. But that's a very interesting story. So I thought I'd share that with you. And it begins in Assam, where you had the chai from. So last year, the Assam tea industry said they turned 200 years old. So 1823, when the tea industry started, what happened? I think there's one man we need to credit. His name is Maniram Datta Barua. He belonged to an aristocratic family. And in 1823, he was in Bengal, living with his family because they had escaped Assam. The Burmese had invaded Assam, so he had moved there. But 1823, they decided to come back home, back to Assam. And it was still the time of the Anglo-Burmese War. The British were, gaining control. And Maniram was 17 years old at that time. But for a man that young, so enterprising, so out there, it's said that he kind of showed the British, things they needed to know about the lay of the land, took them to Guwahati, helped them win the battle. There's one other thing that happened that year. He also knew the British were looking for a way to grow tea in India, that they wanted to break the Chinese monopoly of tea. And there were experiments happening. They were smuggling saplings from China, and they were trying to experiment here. And Maniram Datta found a Scottish guy called Robert Bruce, who was caught in all the action in the battle, and said, you know what? We make tea in Assam. Let me show you. And he took him to this tribe called the Singphos. You will find them. They live in Assam, Nagaland, in that part of India. And he said they brew a beverage that's made from a leaf. Could it be tea? So Robert Bruce and he went. The Singpho chieftain was called Bisagam. And Bisagam brewed some tea. No milk, leaf, made. And Robert Bruce said it's probably tea or something similar. So he took some leaves, sent it to the botanical garden where these experiments were happening about tea and tea growing and all of that. But he didn't live to see what would happen. He died within a year. But his brother took over, and they found that it was indeed a variety of the tea plant. They called it the Assamika variety. And, Maniram Barua was rewarded. When the Assam Tea Company was set up, he was made the Diwan. And he was very good, very, very good businessman. very successful, set up several tea gardens in Assam in that time. And then by 1845, he decided to quit his job because by that time, he'd also set up 2 gardens for himself. So he had his thing sorted out. But the other thing about Maniram Barua was by that time he was more famously known as Maniram Diwan. He'd been Diwan of the Assam Tea Company for a long time. The thing is, he was pro-British because he wanted something from them. He wanted them to restore the Ahom kingdom. He'd been chief minister, the king had been dethroned, and he wanted the Ahom kingdom back. He was an aristocrat. He wanted the good life. But the British did not agree. So he started taking part in all the anti-national activities, the anti-colonial, the anti-imperial activities that was all brewing at that time. I think Sepoy Mutiny happened in 1857, and Maniram Barua was arrested, and very, very quickly, within a year, his sentence was passed and he was publicly hanged in 1858. And some say it's because of his anti-imperial activities, but there are also many who feel the fact that he stood up to the British as an estate owner himself, meeting them on their turf. That didn't go too well with them. And it was his undoing that he did that. But, before we go on further with the story, let's go back to the Singphos a bit. Now, they also rebelled against the British. It was not very pretty. But keeping aside the politics of what happened in Assam and the independence struggle, what were the Singphos drinking, right? So if you look at the map of India and China and you erase all the borders, you'll find that Assam, the Northeast, Yunnan, all of these are in reasonable proximity to each other. And Yunnan is the birthplace of tea. It's where tea was grown and where it today remains a very, very important, it's one of those intangible cultural heritages that the UN has passed. So the tea could have traveled to Assam, tea could have been part of the landscape. I mean, anything is possible because it's all part of the same region. And the Singphos, I spoke to somebody who said he was from the Motok Moran tribe. And he said, if Robert Bruce had come to us, we were also making tea. The story would have been different. Similar, but different. Now we recognize the Singphos as the ones who introduced tea to the British. They make a tea that's called Falap. They still make it. It's similar in some ways to the Lapsang Souchong you had today, because what they do is tea is grown, they pluck the leaves, and this plant has large leaves. It's not small, it's large leaf tea. They pluck it, they sun dry it, wok fry it. They have bamboo, stuff it in bamboo, keep it on their stoves. And over a few months, it gets the heat from the stove that they're cooking on, kind of, and it's firewood before now. So the firewood smoke would kind of oxidize it. And then when you take it out, it's like a hardened, you'll see, I don't have a fala, but something similar. So it's a hardened, compressed cake almost that you cut and then you brew in hot water. And it is smoky. It isn't a bit of an acquired taste, but it's a tea that's very, very intrinsic to that region. It's called the fala. It's intrinsic to that region. All the tribes there, it's quite well known there. The fala. And you can also buy it online, by the way, now. It's available. It keeps up to 5 years if it's in its bamboo casing. So these teas age well. You don't need to worry about how it is. So if we were already drinking tea, right, what did the British do? So I was asking a planter friend called Raj Barua, I said, what did the British do if we were already making and drinking tea? He said, he calls it a great disruption. He said, well, the Chinese have small tea farms. They'll pluck tea a few times a year. They will handcraft the tea. The British said, let's cut down acres of forest. Let's fill it with bushes. Let's pluck tea every 2 weeks. Let's find ways to produce mass volumes. And that's what they did. And there's certain audacity of ambition, right? And what brought that on? One of the reasons is the Industrial Revolution. It was the time of the Industrial Revolution. And machines were coming in. Even in Assam, in the 20th century, you had people, there was one guy called Sam, lots of Scotsmen seem to have something to do with invention of machines related to tea. There was this guy called Samuel Davidson who came to visit his father. Father was a planter in Assam. He looked around, he said, I could do something for this. He made a drying machine. And then he said, okay, then he started making more machines and he set up something called the Sirocco Engineering Works. And then he went on to make a ventilating machine for the Titanic. So we also have another bit of trivia, Assam Tea's connection to the Titanic. There was one guy who worked as a manager at this estate called Amburi. It's still running, still known for very good CTCT. He was working as a manager and he started inventing this machine that would, automate the process of tea making even further. And he started in the 1930s. It took about 20 years before it got better. And it took another 20 years before people started using it. And it became incredibly popular. And what was this machine? It was called the CTC machine. If you've heard of the CTCT, which is what we are drink for chai, it's crushed tear curl. So what this machine would do is just take the tea into processing, the oxidation process, which is what we need to make black tea. And it just processes the leaf. So what you get at the end of it is just granules. You no longer recognize the leaf. But what you get is a consistently tasting, consistent appearing granules that make tea. And with the machine, they could produce volumes, right? Volumes of tea. And this just changed everything about how the colony actually ran, how the British actually changed the industry. They went from tea being a Chinese art form to a commodity, which is also why in India, when we look at tea and chai, we just think of it as a cheap beverage we can have every day and not that fine. We don't have the ceremonies. It's never been told to us as that. So all this was happening through the 20th century. So how did we become a nation, nation of tea drinkers? What happened to us? Because all the tea that was being made was exported. None of it was being made for us. We were not the market for the British East India Company until the beginning of the 20th century. They suddenly realized here was a captive market for tea. And they tried. Lukewarm efforts happened. We didn't take to it. And then the world wars happened and they were stuck with a lot of tea. And then they got really aggressive with the campaign. They had set up trains, so we had railway stations. They started setting up vendors in railway stations. They stuck posters saying, this is how you brew tea. Take the pot, the English style, the pot, warm the pot, put the tea, pour boiling water, steep it for a few minutes, stick your pinky finger out, the works, right? Then they also started distributing free samples. And then they started sending people house to house to teach women in the homes how to make tea. So they got us really hooked to tea. And I said, and when? This was still tea we're talking about. It hasn't yet become chai. Right? So when did tea become chai? And how did tea become chai? Or is tea chai? So that question took me to an American professor who's a Ramayana expert. So he's the one person who's done all this research on chai because in the 70s, in 1971, he came to India to research the Ramayana. And at some point started drinking tea, kept coming again and again. And the more he came, the more chai he drank by then. And then he came back in 2001 with a fellowship to study chai's cultural history. And he said, when he told people in India that he was researching chai, and they said, what were we drinking before chai? Because that's a question none of them seemed to, that was a question he heard many times. And then he said, you know what? You were not drinking anything before chai. Chai didn't replace anything. The British marketing worked so well. We got hooked to it. But here's the thing. The people who were asked to make tea decided they were not going to go by the poster. I think it's a great act of civil disobedience. We said we will make tea our way, Give us the tea, give us the milk, we'll put what we want in it, the sugar, boil it, none of your 5 minutes steeping, none of your porcelain pots. We will make it the way we drink it, and this is our chai. So he calls it a finest display of jugaad. There is no inventor of chai. It has happened, it has come into being I really think, this great act of civil disobedience, and that's what gives it its cult status today. So that's how chai came to be. But look at this, from a nation of being not drinking tea, in 100 years, we were consuming 70% of what we produce. Today, we produce 1.3 billion kilos a year. We consume 90% of the tea we produce. That's what they created. That's the difference from then to now. And in an extraordinarily short time, right? I mean, it took so little time. So today you have tea growing in the hills. You have the Darjeeling and Kumaon and Kangra and Nilgiris. You have the plains. You have Far East. You have the Palap. You have people making all kinds of tea. You know. So what I'm just hoping we take back today is each of these spaces really impacts how the tea is grown. What we get in the market is a tea that's blended for consistency in flavor and price. What we've been sold on is you buy this tea, you're paying the same price for it, it'll taste the same. But tea is a seasonal product. It's supposed to taste different every season. And it's supposed to taste different if it comes from different places. A hill-grown tea will not taste like a plains tea. A smoked tea will not taste like chai. So I think some way, I hope if the one thing that you all take away, if not from what I said, from the teas we're going to taste now, is how, like wine, terroir really impacts tea. And there's more than one kind of tea, and there's more than one way of brewing it. There are no rules. You can break every rule that's thrown at you. And, the thing to look for is to find new teas, enjoy the discovery of tea, look for the place it comes from, the people who make it, and the people why they make it a certain way. Enjoy the differences every season, and drink more tea. I think that's the other thing we need. Drink more tea.
It's interesting. I was wondering when the story of tea would come, because I have this narrative firsthand from someone who dealt with making tea. This was in the post-First World War period in Bangalore. I'm talking of Bangalore. Baba Budan had already established coffee. And so nearly everybody used to drink coffee. And Brookbond was finding it extremely difficult to break into the market. So they employed widows, of whom there were plenty in Bangalore, gave them a Nirbhaya stove, a saucepan, a vessel for milk, and made them go from house to house, brew tea, and serve it free. And the marketing was very smart. See, all the men folk were working in offices at that time. So they would go away to work around 10:30 in the morning. And these ladies would visit the homemakers somewhere around 1:32 when they were just out of their siesta, and then hawk the tea to them. They were actually giving it away for free. And the ladies were paid 50 paise those days for each day's assignment. And they got the women hooked on to tea. The men would still go to cafeterias to have coffee because the women didn't want coffee at home. Very interesting.
So it's amazing how many people remember grandmothers, hosting these door-to-door, tea promoters. But what a great way to promote tea. I mean, it's so aggressive. I mean, how they did that, and very, women, but tea and women also have. And there's another story, another time perhaps, but how tea has actually played a role in the women's suffragette movement in the US and the UK as well. Because coffee was always seen as a man's and very masculine, but tea rooms then became the spaces where women could go, and when they went, they did what they had to do.
I discovered this blend, which is one of my favorites, is an Irish tea. The story is that they perfected the blend and they wanted to protect the process so much that they would export the leaves and process it in Ireland and then sell it all over the world. They wouldn't want to process it here in India. And similar thing was a discovery. But I don't know if it actually ended up adding flavor to the leaves while they were being transported, like how in coffee you have monsoon Malabar, which picks up. So is there any such story that you are aware of where the British picked up the tea from? And there's also some of the blends are from other colonies like Africa and Kenya as well.
So the English breakfast is a blend that uses Kenyan, Sri Lankan, and Assam tea. So all black tea, all colonies again, all British colonies. But taking tea green leaves itself would have been a challenge, because what happens as soon as you pluck, the oxidation starts. It's like apples being cut out and kept. The same thing happens to tea as well. So even in the estates, there has to be a processing facility as close as possible because within an hour it starts changing. So it's likely that it was a story they told, like the Earl Grey. It's again a fabricated story, right? I don't think Mr. Earl Grey, the Earl, His Highness, the Earl, had anything to do with it. But I do think the British fall short when they come to marketing teas. The Chinese do it way better. Their stories are far more fantastic. They involve, magical things happening. So I would go with, I would go with the Chinese on this. The British stories are okay.
So tea with milk or without, and why?
Both. So black tea, because it's very tannic. So what happened was when the CTC machines came, the cost of tea reduced because they were producing volumes, right? So then when they sort the tea, it sorts by size of granules. So the very fine goes with the unfortunate name of dust. The Chinese would have done a better job of naming it. They would have called it maybe gold dust, but we call it dust. It's very good. Yes, it's tea dust. So when they sort it by size, the finest come as dust. It's not a bad tea. It's not a bad tea at all, because the only thing is it's very fine. So it brews very quickly, very strongly. It takes very little time to brew, and it doesn't cost much. So what happened the machine did was it reduced the cost of tea. So your chaiwalas could afford, and that tea is so strong that it needs milk to sort of balance it, just to temper it down a bit. So the milk, it needs that kind of tea. Whereas the latsang pisang, you can try adding milk if you like it. It's fine. Like I said, I think all rules out of the window. If you don't like it with milk, you don't. The only reason we kept it without milk was also so you can just taste the flavors for what they are. The milk does tend to change the flavor. Sugar just ruins the flavor. But that's not to say if that's how you like it. That's how you like it. Perfectly okay. My husband will not drink the tea I make, but he'll go to the chai bar. He says that's much better. But that's how he likes it. So no right or wrong here. So we thought we'll do one green, black, and white. If you're drinking green tea for health and hating it, please switch to white. You will love it. So oolong is there in Chinese and Taiwanese style. Very, very flavorful because there's a lot of craft to making it. It's not just about the plant. There are people who make it who won't sleep during the days that they make it, because they have to stir it, roast it, do something to it every few hours. They gauge that by, touch and feel and smell. So India oolong is still very new, but we make very good white teas in India. Our greens are getting better, but they still tend to be bitter. So what we have here is 3 different terroirs. We have a black tea from Darjeeling. It's a second flush. We have a Japanese green tea, which I haven't tried. So it's, it's going to be an adventure for all of us. And I have wild white tea from Sri Lanka. It's a forest grown. We don't prune the bushes. They grow 10 meters tall. So this is from an abandoned estate where the teas are now full-grown trees. So they do well with the Chinese style of drinking, which is you take, water which is about 80 degrees, pour 30 seconds, drink, pour again in the same. So if you're using leaf, you can re-steep it. And the Chinese teas, you can re-steep it 10 times. Our teas, you can re-steep it twice. So it's a short story, but this, I thought, will set the context for where we all come from and how we've gotten here with as far as tea goes.